Hello, good morning. It's Tuesday. Forgot what day of the week it was. Hello, good morning. I hope everybody is doing well today. Sorry for lack of streams. It's the same old shindig. I'm not going to try to make excuses. I just don't prioritize Twitch the way that I used to. But it's cold outside today and rainy. It feels like fall. The colors are changing the very little that they change around me. Hello. Happy Tuesday afternoon to you, Terror. Thank you for being here. And then after I'm done here, I'm gonna go Christmas shopping. Look at my nails. I got them done last week. I like them. My shirt is slightly green, so if I lean too close, I start to blend into the green screen. So I'm gonna try to not do that too much, but we'll see. How is the volume of the music before I get started? We're gonna finish Death by Design today. Wow, twins. We're gonna finish Death by Design today, but before I jump in, I just would like to know how the music is doing. Volume seems okay? Okay, sounds good. Alright. Well, I appreciate you being here. I hope your day so far has been lovely. I just took a little sip of peach honey aha. I also have some cold coffee in my hairspray mug. Good morning, Baltimore. Okay, with that being said, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right in. I feel like I'm a little too tall, so I'm going to move my chair down a smidgen. Alright, here we go. So I remember the last thing that happened was that Nancy sat in the window and then felt sick again and like passed out and fell out the window. I remember that. That's what happened. So we're picking up now in chapter 12. Nancy gripped the sill with her knees and hung on by the sheer force of will. Only her calves and feet were still inside the window, but they were slipping now. The blood was pounding in her head as she made an attempt to raise her hands back to the window ledge, but her body would not respond to her brain's command. "Bess," she moaned, and the wind snatched her words away. "Help me! Nancy! Oh no, I'm coming!" Bess flew to the window and grabbed Nancy by the knees. She held on and slowly hoisted her friend back into the room as easily as if she'd been George or Ned. Together they lay on the floor in a heap. Finally, Bess raised herself up on her elbow. "I can't leave you alone for 1 second," she joked shakily. "Who do you think you are, Superwoman?" Nancy was breathing too hard to speak. What if I'd come up here alone, she kept wondering. "Thanks, Bess," she panted at last. "You saved my life if you hadn't been there." "Well, I was," Bess said, patting Nancy's shoulder. Let's not even think about it." "Oh, Nancy." There were tears in Bess's eyes, but in a second she straightened up resolutely. "Okay, enough emotion," she said lightly. "This is your slave driver speaking again. Let's head on over to Orsini's before he closes." "That means another visit to Kim's suite to get directions," Nancy said reluctantly. "But you're right, Bess, let's go." Luckily, Kim was too busy to pay them much attention when they got to her office. She was intently studying a striking 6-foot-tall model dressed in a scarlet metallic tube-top dress with what looked like matching biking shorts underneath. Her assistant Sarah was standing next to her with a pen and pad prepared to take notes. "Did you find my sister?" Kim asked abstractedly when they knocked on her office door. "Yes, and she was very helpful," Nancy replied. "But now I've got to bother you for something else, the address of Mr. Orsini's shop." Kim turned to stare at Nancy. "Surely you don't suspect Raphael?" she asked incredulously. "He is a sweet old man." No, said Nancy. "We just want to ask him a few questions." She grinned. "I bet you've heard me say that enough." Kim didn't smile back. "Here's the address," she said, scribbling it down on an old envelope. Then she turned to the model again. "The hemline's crooked," she said to Sarah. "And Carlotta?" The beautiful model gazed anxiously at Kim, and suddenly Nancy recognized her. She'd last seen her on the cover of Glamour. "I know you're a hot new model," Kim said icily, "but please remember what you're doing. That dress is for teens. It's supposed to be fun, so look as if you're having fun, for heaven's sake." Carlotta looked completely crestfallen. "Yes, Miss Daly," she murmured, plucking nervously at one of her sleeves. Nancy caught Bess's eye, and they started for the door, but they were stopped by Kim's voice. "So, you're still not making any progress, Nancy?" Nancy looked her straight in the eye. "On the contrary, we're actually making very good progress," she said. "I'll definitely solve this case, but I'm not sure you'll be happy with those results. You really do have a lot of enemies, you know." And she walked quietly out the door with Bess. Raphael Orsini's tailor shop was only a few minutes away by taxi. It didn't look as imposing as Nancy had expected. In its window, a dusty-looking mannequin modeled a red suit straight out of the 1950s, and a small sign on the door simply read, "R. Orsini, Luxury Tailoring." "I hope he's still here," said Bess. "It's after 6, you know." "He will be," Nancy replied, "until 6:30. As soon as Nancy and Bess opened the door, they were hit by the loudest flamenco music they'd ever heard. It made the whole shop shake. But where was everyone? "Hello?" called Nancy. "Anyone home?" Behind the counter was a drawn curtain. Nancy saw a bell on the counter and picked it up and rang it, then rang it again. She was sure that no one would be able to hear the slight tinkling sound above the music, but to her surprise, a tiny man dramatically stepped out from behind the curtain the second time she rang. He couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, and he had a precise, fastidious appearance. A small mustache, gray hair parted in the middle, a neat blue suit, and gold spectacles. Nancy found herself smiling down at him. "Mr. Orsini?" she asked. "You're looking at him. What can I do for you?" "My name is Nancy Drew. I'm a private investigator." Immediately, Mr. Orsini stepped back in feigned horror, his eyes twinkling. "So young!" he exclaimed. "And such a pretty girl to be doing such dangerous work!" "It's not a joke, Mr. Orsini," Nancy said in a low voice. "I'm working for Kim Daly, and what I'm about to tell you must be in strictest confidence. There's been an attempt made on her life." Mr. Orsini looked horrified. "That beautiful woman? So gifted? Who would wanna—" Then his voice wavered, and he looked away, biting his lip. He must know what her reputation is, Nancy thought. Maybe he's even witnessed her temper firsthand. "There's more to it," she went on. "We have reason to think that someone is stealing Kim's designs, or trying to. What kind of security measures do you have here?" Mr. Orsini's eyes widened in surprise. "Security? At Luxury Tailoring? We've never had a problem. And not only that, I know everyone in the business. Chicago is really a small town when it comes to fashion. There aren't that many people in the business, and I know them all personally." "Well, is there any chance that someone, a competitor, say, could have sneaked in here and gotten hold of Kim's designs?" Nancy persisted. "Impossible. Absolutely impossible. We don't let anyone but employees into our workroom. Not ever." Thought Nancy. "Does Kim have any clothes in the shop now?" she asked him. "Let me see," said Mr. Orsini. "She did it this morning, yes, but she was planning to have the clothes picked up today, I know. Let me call my assistant and see whether someone's already come by for them. Miss Swang," he called out. "Turn down the music. Come out here for a second." The music stopped, and a sudden silence hung in the air. What a strange-looking woman, Nancy thought as Miss Swang pushed her way out through the curtain. That has to be the worst haircut I've ever seen, Nancy thought. It looks as though she cuts it with a scythe. Miss Swang's hair just hung there, lifeless and somehow dusty-looking, and the clothes she was wearing seemed to have been chosen at random. An electric blue polyester shirt, a dark green wool cardigan, a red corduroy skirt, and expensive-looking alligator shoes. "You wanted me, Mr. Orsini?" she asked in a hoarse, grating voice that was painful to listen to. "I did, dear. These 2 charming young ladies would like to talk to you. Miss Swang is a part-time assistant here," he explained. "I always take on extra help before a big fashion show. Have Miss Daly's clothes been picked up today, Miss Swang?" "Let me check the records," Miss Swang croaked, picking up a notebook. "Yes, they have," she said after a second. "Do you know who pressed them?" Nancy asked. Maybe a word with the presser who'd handled Kim's clothes would turn something up. But Miss Swang's answer was disappointing. "No one in particular," she said. "I mean, all the presses work on all the designs. We don't make assignments or anything." She turned to her employer. "Do you need me for anything else?" "No, thanks, dear," he answered. Miss Swang pushed her way back through the curtains, and in a minute the music began pounding away again. Mr. Orsini spread his hands apologetically. You see, he said, as I said, no one comes in here off the streets, except you two. Everything is by appointment, and I know everyone. He broke off and gave Nancy a penetrating stare. What exactly are you looking for? He asked. There's one outfit we're especially interested in, said Nancy. It's a pearl-colored silk suit with a cropped jacket and a knee-length skirt. It's got a ruby brooch on the jacket. Do you remember that, Mr. Orsini? I certainly do, he answered emphatically, but I did not work on it. Let me get a slip for you to see. He pulled out a box of receipts and began leafing through them. Is it unusual for your customers to leave jewelry on their clothes? Said Nancy. I assume that you take the brooches off before you clean or press them? Mr. Orsini drew himself up to his full height and glared at Nancy as though she'd insulted him. Of course we do, he said, and our customers know they can trust us. My assistants are instructed to list any jewelry that is left on the clothes and then lock the piece in the vault. Nancy and Bess were studying the slip. But there's no mention of a brooch on this slip, Bess said. Isn't that strange? Then perhaps there was no brooch, said Mr. Orsini. Why do you keep asking me about this pin? Is there one missing? Yes, Nancy said. It's missing now. It wasn't taken from here, we know, but we want to know what happened to it while it was here. That's why we want to know who might have handled it. Mr. Orsini still looked ruffled. He shrugged his shoulders impatiently. My staff is reliable, he said. If you do not believe that, there is no way I can make you believe it. I'm sorry to have upset you, Nancy said. Another dead end, she thought to herself, disappointed. Would you do me a favor? If you do hear anything about the brooch, would you call? It's more important than you know. She could feel herself beginning to wilt again. Bess was watching Nancy anxiously. I think it's time to get you home, Nan, she said. All right, Nancy said exhaustedly. Let's go then. Thank you, Mr. Orsini. Now the little man's face was filled with concern. You're not well? He asked. I didn't realize it. Of course she's not well, Bess burst out indignantly. That pin she's been asking about was... It's all right, Bess, said Nancy. Let's just go get a cab. Thank you, Mr. Orsini. Out on the street, Nancy stood shivering in the cold while Bess hailed a taxi. So what do we know? She asked once they'd settled themselves in the cab. Nothing more than we knew before. Bess patted her shoulder comfortingly. Don't give up, Nan, she said. There's still most of a day left. Her voice broke, and she turned her head to stare out the window. As the girls crossed the hotel lobby to the elevator, more than one head turned to watch them. We must look pretty strange, Nancy thought. Bess is practically dragging me along. But Nancy was too tired and disheartened to care what anyone thought. I remember you locking the door, Bess, she said when they reached their floor. Or was I supposed to do it? Now I can't remember. I did lock it, Bess said. But look, Nancy whispered. A tiny sliver of light was shining through the crack. I know we turned the lights off, Nancy thought. And even if we hadn't, the only way we could see any light through the door from here is if it's open. Stay here, Bess, Nancy murmured. She tiptoed up to the door, her eyes wide. It's unlocked, she whispered to Bess, and I can hear someone inside. End of chapter 12.
Hot dang if that don't beat all. I've read every single book that gal's ever written.
Oh, hi, V. I was just catching up on your TMB playthrough with Terra. Now I have to go back to work. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for subbing. I really appreciate it, HS. I hope you're having a good day. Model can't even make her clothes fun. Amateur. Hi, Disney. Thanks for shouting out, Disney. I think wandering a town in sewers sounds super fun. I liked Black and White, too. Okay. Shiny Pokemans. Thank you for the claps. What kind of shiny Pokemon did you get? Sorry. alligator. Isn't shiny fur alligator green? Or is it purple? He was a gator boy. She said, see you later, boy. He wasn't human enough for her. Now he's a superstar, slamming on his guitar. Anyway, thank you. I really appreciate you liking my cover. Okay, I guess I'll keep reading. We're gonna solve the mystery with Nancy. Pardon my yawning. I'm just so comfy right now. It's like perfect temperature in my house. Usually I'm either cold or hot, but right now I'm like super comfy in my long sleeves. Okay. Moving on. Chapter 13. There's trouble behind that door, thought Nancy, and I'm in no shape to deal with it. But I have to. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and shoved the door open. Ned? She gasped. He was stretched out on her bed. Now he sprang to his feet and took her in his arms. It's Ned? Bess shrieked from behind them. Ned, don't ever do that to me again. I almost had a heart attack. Sorry, Ned said with a grin. I didn't mean to scare either of you. I thought I'd close the door. He leaned over and switched off the TV, which he'd been watching with the sound off. I was the one who was scared. When I got back here and no one answered the door, I got worried. For all I knew, you could have been unconscious or something. So I used that old credit card routine you showed me once, Nan, and opened the door. I guess I half expected to see you stretched out on the floor. Well, I didn't expect to see you at all, Nancy said. When did the police let you go? About an hour ago. I'm so sorry I lost my temper with Paul. He grimaced. I guess lost my temper is kind of a mild way to put it. I still don't know what came over me. I was just so worried about you, and I thought he'd been the one who poisoned you, and, well, I lost my head. The worst thing about it all was thinking how much extra trouble I made for you. Well, you're back, said Nancy, kissing him on the cheek, and that's what's important. And you only did it because you cared for me, so I can't really get too upset. And Paul's okay, Ned added. He smiled a little. It turns out he passed out from the nerves, not from being punched. Anyway, he's not pressing charges. He put his hand on Nancy's chin and lifted her face. How are you? He asked gently. That's the only important question. Nancy met his eyes steadily. Not great, she said, but Bess has been taking incredible care of me, and when we have time, I'll fill you in. Don't bother, said Bess, but I do think you should go to bed now, Nan. You need some rest. You can start work again in the morning. I agree, said Ned. I don't, said Nancy. There's just not enough time. Once I find the antidote, I can rest. I've got to talk to all the suspects again, tonight if I can. I'll have plenty of rest if we don't find the antidote, she said grimly to herself. I'll have nothing but rest. Something of the sort must have occurred to Bess and Ned, too. By the way, I called the hospital for you, Nancy, said Ned after a little silence. They're still working on it. Well, where would you like to start? Bess finally asked, breaking the silence that followed Ned's report. With Lena, Nancy answered immediately. And this time we're not leaving until we get some answers. It was only a few seconds in the elevator and a few steps from there to Lena's suite, but by the time they reached the door, Nancy's legs were buckling under her. Ned and Bess had to support her, one on each side. There was the door. To Nancy's tired eyes, it seemed to quiver as she knocked. No answer. Well, it is late, Ned pointed out. She must have left. He tried the doorknob, and it turned easily in his hand. Ned swung the door open, and the three of them peered into Lena's suite. No sign of life, Bess said. Should we come back later? Nancy's lips were a thin line. No, she said. It's even better if she's not here. If no one's here. She reached past Ned and switched on the light. I want another look at that voice distorter, and you two can poke around to see if there's anything here that looks like one of Kim's designs. I know we're snooping, but detectives just have to be snoops once in a while. Lena's workroom seemed a mile long as Nancy slowly made her way across it, and she'd only gotten halfway there when her head began to swim again. She staggered over to Lena's sleek, streamlined desk and eased herself into the chair. There were papers strewn all over the desk, but Nancy was too tired to focus on any of them. There could be a whole stack of stolen designs here, she thought, and I wouldn't be able to see them. What a great detective I am. She swiveled in the chair until she was facing Lena's typewriter. A single sheet of paper was in the machine, and Nancy stared at it idly, the letters swimming in and out of focus. Then she sat up straighter in the chair and concentrated to steady the words. The sheet of paper was a letter, and it was addressed to Bronwyn Weiss. Bronwyn Weiss. Who is that? Why is that name so familiar? Nancy wondered. Then she remembered. Bronwyn Weiss was the Chicago Tatler's gossip columnist, the one who'd trashed Kim so badly in the paper the day before. Why was Lena writing to her? Nancy squinted and leaned in closer to the letter. Gradually, she began to realize why Lena had written this letter. Dear Bronwyn, Kim Daly's at it again. What some designers won't do for publicity. She's the one behind all those rumors that someone has been making death threats to her. Can you believe it? She even poisoned her own dog to make the whole thing more believable. I know it sounds incredible, but I was there at the time, and it doesn't stop there. She's hired a private detective to look into these threats just so her story will be more convincing. It's pretty sad, really. All this fuss just to take away attention from the fact that her show is going to be pathetic. Hope this will come in handy for your column. The letter ended there. I wonder if Lena was planning to put her own signature on this, Nancy thought. I bet she wasn't. Hey gang, she called in a low voice. Come and look at this. After Ned and Bess both read the letter, Ned asked, Who's Bronwyn Weiss? And Bess said, Pretty nasty stuff. Her last column just about butchered Kim, Nancy said, and none of us could figure out who tipped Bronwyn off. I guess Lena must have been the source for that one too. Ned shook his head. So this is the glamorous world of high fashion, he said sarcastically. When you have competition, you just find some junky tabloid and spread a few rumors. Makes me glad I'm just a humble college student. Does this mean Lena's the poisoner? Bess asked. If she hates Kim this much... I don't think so, Nancy answered. Who'd bothered to write a poison pen letter when they were using real poison? I mean, it's the difference between calling someone a name and stabbing the person. Lena hates Kim, but Lena's a pussycat compared to whoever dipped that pen. I do think Lena made those threats over the phone, though, she added. She's got that voice-distorting equipment over there. Nancy pointed to the corner. And she also has that speech defect that the vote coder couldn't hide. Besides, nasty phone calls and nasty letters seem to go hand in hand. It was an effort for Nancy to get the words out. Her body felt heavy and made of clay, and she could hardly keep her eyes open. Ned was talking now, but he sounded as if he were down a well. Lena will probably be back any moment now. Do we wait and hit her with our big guns or what? No, said Nancy feebly. The trouble is, we still don't have any clue about the poisoning. She shook her head despairingly. If Lena's not the one, and if Morgan isn't the one, and if Paul isn't the one, then who's left? Nancy wobbled to her feet. I gotta get back to bed, she muttered. Can you guys help me? She was concentrating so hard on not falling over she didn't see the panicky look Ned and Bess exchanged as they rushed to her side. Ups-a-daisy, here we go, Ned said cheerfully, lifting her, but his face was white with worry. Once she was up in her room, Nancy fell into bed fully clothed. Nothing Ned or Bess said could reach her, and the world of high fashion meant nothing to her now. There was only one thought in her mind as blackness overcame her. She had just half a day to live. End of chapter 13. The scales that are normally reddish and blue-green. Reddish are blue-green. Gotcha. I caught a fake him on a bug dark type that can detach its head and whip it as a projectile. Whoa. That's wild. Woo, half a day to live. A natural desire. Thank you for the claps. Okay. How am I gonna save the game, Disney? Disney, you just wasted 200 channel points on something that I'm not doing. Disney Magic 24 redeemed save the game. Okay, buddy. I I don't think there are any bug dark types yet. Could be wrong, though. Like, in, like, real Pokemon? What's Mega Pinsir? That's like bug flying? Or still just bug? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. You're probably right. I don't know either. Okay. Moving on. We only have 3 more chapters left. Okay. It's getting brighter outside. Now I feel like I need to adjust my light. Well, that's not right, is it? So bright. My future's so bright. Gotta wear shades. Okay. Anyway. Bug flying for Mega Pinsir. Okay. I feel like my green screen's being wonky. Okay, just doing my best. I got that glow. Okay. Now it's doing that thing where it, like, takes away part of my face. Hi, Anna. How are you? Boop. That's a little better. Now my face isn't concaving in on itself. The sun is now coming from the window like this, which is why this side is bright. I should, like, put a little... Well, I guess I could just do this. Now it's a little more even. But now my shirt goes weird. There's no winning. It is what it is. It is what it is. I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad to see you. Thank you for shouting out, Anna. Alright, I'm gonna jump in. Chapter 14. When Nancy woke up, sunlight was pouring through the windows. Bess was sitting in a chair next to her bed reading a magazine. "You're awake at last," she said, smiling. "I woke up really early, couldn't sleep, and came in here. I wanted to keep an eye on you." "Thanks, Bess," Nancy said with a yawn. She stretched, sat up, and looked at her travel clock. It was 7. "Bess, what's the matter with you? Why'd you let me sleep so late?" cried Nancy. "This could be my last day. There's no time left." I'm sorry, Nancy," Bess stammered. "I just thought you needed lots of sleep so you could get your strength back. I guess I wasn't thinking." Nancy forced herself to relax. None of this was Bess's fault, after all. She took a deep breath and slowly got out of bed. "I'm the one who's sorry," she said, giving Bess a quick hug around the shoulders. "I shouldn't snap at my best friend." "I'll call Dr. Liston," she added, "and then we can get going." Dr. Liston wasn't in her office, so Nancy had her paged. As she waited, she couldn't help imagining how wonderful it would be if the doctor's news was good. She'd rush down to the hospital, get the antidote, then have a huge celebratory reunion with Ned and Bess. Then she'd call Hannah and tell her about the narrow escape she'd had. It would be like waking up from a bad dream, and her friends would all be wide-eyed as she told them the story. "Hello, Nancy," said Dr. Liston's voice. "I was down in the lab. Nancy, my news is not good." "Oh no." Nancy closed her eyes and slumped against the wall. From her chair by the bed, Bess watched her in alarm. "We've made no progress since yesterday," said Dr. Liston, "and we've got to have the identity of the poison before mid-morning so we can prepare the antidote in time. Is there any chance of that?" "I hope so," Nancy said in a tiny voice. "I'll be here by the phone from now on," the doctor promised. "And Nancy, even if you don't find the poisoner in time, please come to the hospital. Even if we don't have the antidote, we can at least make you more comfortable than you'd be in the hotel." Make you more comfortable? She means they'll help me die more comfortably? Thought Nancy, appalled. "I'll come," she said aloud. "One way or the other, you'll see me there." When she hung up the phone, something inside Nancy's head clicked into place. This was it. There was no more time for self-pity and no more time for panic. She was losing energy faster and faster, but if the next few hours were going to be her last ones, she'd at least go down fighting. "I'm gonna grab a quick shower," she told Bess, "and then we can get going." First, Nancy made the water as hot as she could stand it. Then to rinse off, she turned on the cold tap full blast. The icy needles of water were pure torture, but when Nancy stepped out of the shower, she felt wonderfully refreshed. There was a knock at the door just as she finished dressing. Nancy opened it and found Ned there. Like Bess, he looked drawn and haggard, and Nancy's heart contracted with pity. He's taking this even worse than I am, she thought. But if I had to stand by helplessly and watch him die... Come in, she said gently, taking Ned's hand and pulling him into the room. You're just in time for breakfast. Should I call room service? Asked Bess. No way, we're going to the Palm Court, Nancy replied. No way yourself, said Bess. You're not going to run all over this hotel. I don't want you wasting energy like that. Wasting energy? I can't do anything up here, Nancy retorted. We're going to the Palm Court for breakfast, and then I'm confronting every suspect on the list, okay? Bess looked up at Ned. Do we do what she says? She's the boss, Ned answered lightly. He looked as though he was fighting to keep a smile off his face. Then we're off, said Nancy. It was just 7:30. Wow, Nancy murmured as they walked into the Palm Court. Doesn't this place ever empty out? The restaurant was as crowded and clamorous as it had been at lunch. Kim, dressed in a Dayglow green midi dress and Dayglow orange stockings and white boots, was conspicuous in one corner as she dictated something to Morgan. She nodded briefly as they passed her table. They must all be having breakfast meetings, said Ned. Well, that's what we're going to have too, said Nancy. She had just spotted Paul Laval at a table across the room. There's the first person I'm going to meet with, and she hurried across the room to his table. Paul was buried in the morning paper. He jumped when Nancy tapped his shoulder and frowned when he realized who it was. What do you want today? He said sarcastically. Is a mass murderer supposed to be sitting at this table? Paul, I am so sorry for what happened yesterday, Nancy answered. I still can't believe it myself, but please believe me when I say it was a terrible mistake. A little more than a mistake, I'd say, Paul answered shortly. You're right, of course, Nancy said. I only wish I could make it up to you somehow. If I could explain everything, can you possibly join us for breakfast? There is a lot to talk about. Is your boyfriend gonna jump me again? Oh, Paul, Ned feels awful about what he did, and he's never done anything like that before. He went wild because he thought you'd tried to kill me. Can you understand that? I guess so, said Paul slowly. He stood up, beckoned to his waiter to bring the order to Nancy's table, and followed Nancy back to where Bess and Ned were sitting. Ned stood up quickly and held out his hand when he saw Paul. Hey, I'm really sorry, he said, turning a little red. I hope that Nancy explained, and thanks for not pressing charges against me. Forget it, said Paul with a wave of his hand. What can I do for you all? Their first course arrived just then, but Nancy didn't touch her melon. Instead, she pushed it aside and laid her hands on the table. I'll get right down to it, Paul. Why didn't you want me to see the voice distortion equipment? That's been bothering you? Paul asked, a note of real surprise in his voice. No mystery there, it's just a theatrical device. I'm planning to use it for Lena's show. I kind of liked the idea of introducing new outfit with a different voice. I just didn't want Kim's people to find out about it, that's all. I was afraid they'd steal the idea. How could they steal the idea if they didn't know about it? Asked Bess. Well, you and Nancy were hanging around with Kim, Paul said. I was afraid you might talk, that's all. That's really all. But you got angry so fast. Well, I could hear Lena in her office. You weren't supposed to know she was there. I wasn't sure if she could hear us, but I wanted to make it absolutely clear to her, if she was listening, that I was not doing anything to hurt her interests. Okay, but what about the fact that you just happened to be at the grand ballroom at the time I arranged to meet the poisoner there? Said Nancy. You have to admit, that looked suspicious. I admit it, said Paul, half laughing. But it was really just a coincidence. They do happen every once in a while, you know. I was just there to check a few things. He rubbed his stomach ruefully where Ned had punched him. That will teach me not to be compulsive about my job. And it'll teach me not to jump to conclusions, said Nancy with a sigh. But maybe you can help me, though. While you were in the ballroom, did you see anyone else there? Let's see. Paul thought about it while Nancy took an unenthusiastic bite of her melon. No, he finally said. It was just me and Allison. She did seem a little ill at ease, but then she always does. She's kind of a nervous person, I guess. Around you, anyway, thought Nancy, but she didn't say it. Well, speak of the devil, Paul said genially. Here's Allison herself. Maybe you can ask her if she saw anyone. Hey, Allison, good morning. He gave her a cordial wave as she walked toward the table. But Allison did not look especially cordial that morning. I thought we were having breakfast together, just you and me, she said with a toss of her short blonde hair. She hadn't even glanced at anyone else at the table. There's plenty of room here, Nancy said. Will you join us? Allison still would not look at her. No thanks, she said briefly. I will sit over there. She pointed to a table in the far corner of the room. Paul, would you come over when you're through? She turned and began to weave her way through the crowd. She's probably not a suspect, Nancy said to herself. After all, she must be able to see that Paul's not interested in her the way she is in him, but I have to check out everyone today, even the most remote possibility. She jumped up quickly and began to follow Allison across the room, but she never made it. The air around her suddenly began to shimmer and pulse in front of her eyes, and Nancy fainted. "Let me through! Let me through!" It was Ned's voice that brought Nancy back to consciousness, but where was he? She lay on her side in a dreamy haze. "I'm just not going to get up this time," she thought, and closed her eyes again. "It's too comfortable here." "Please, will you let me through?" shouted Ned again from the back of the crowd. Nancy's eyelids fluttered open. "Don't bother, Ned," she murmured. "I'm fine right here." All she could see were feet. Feet stood in a circle around her, a well-burnished pair of men's wingtips, a pair of black pumps with gray stockings, dark green snakeskin boots, and an elegant pair of women's alligator shoes. Wait a second, Nancy thought drowsily. I've seen those alligator shoes before. Where had it been? Nancy couldn't remember. She was about to close her eyes again when it suddenly hit her and jolted her awake. At Mr. Orsini's tailor shop, his strange assistant Miss Swang had been wearing them. They had stood out because the rest of her outfit was so weird. Nancy stiffened on the floor. A new idea had just flashed through her mind. Mr. Orsini had said that no one could get at the clothes in the pressing company because security was too tight. But what about somebody who already worked at the pressing company? An employee would have full access to all the clothes, of course, and what if an enemy of Kim's had applied for a job there? It would have been simple for that person to poison Kim's brooch. Finally, what if that person had made one tiny mistake? The mistake of wearing the same shoes at the pressing company job as she did at her job in the fashion world. Then whoever wore those shoes would be the poisoner, and that meant that the poisoner was standing there in the crowd surrounding her. End of chapter 14.
One whole year. Heck yes. Tuesday.
One whole year? Heck yes! Coley, thank you so much for subbing for 12 months. I can't believe you've been subbed for a whole year, but I appreciate it, and you so much! Thank you! Sunlight pouring through the windows. It's like the book knows. I know. Might as well die comfy. Yeah. I mean, isn't that kind of the dream of everybody? Paul, Mr. Everything is coincidental. Look at that collection of detectives. Look at them. Coley's, me. Who's Miss G? I don't know, but that one's cute. A sleepy detective. That's cute, too. They're suspicious of the coincidences, yes. Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the claps. Yes, hype. I appreciate you waiting till the pause, because otherwise I would have been like this. Until it was over. We have 2 more chapters left for Nancy to get the poison antidote. She's a streamer called Miss Giggles, and she has fantastic emotes. I see. That's cute. Thank you for shouting out Coley. Even though me and Coley have opposite schedules now, and I hardly ever get to catch Coley anymore. Which I'm so sad about, because, like, it used to be that, like, Coley's streams were some of the few I could catch, and now I can't catch any of them. She's not anyone I know, I just follow for the emotes. That's fair, that's fair. My hand is like crampy. Oh. It says my chat disconnected. Test. Oh, okay. She's the one who... I like that one too. The scared one. It's very cute. Okay. 2 more chapters. I have a little bitty frog in my throat. I'm gonna drink my cold coffee. It's not that great anymore. Let's go! Let's go! Rip it out. Okay. Chapter 15. All this had flashed through Nancy's mind in an instant. Now abruptly, she raised herself up on her elbows and met Allison's gaze. Allison. Nancy darted a look down at the girl's feet. Yes, it was Allison who was wearing the alligator shoes. She must have been wearing a wig and different makeup at Mr. Orsini's, but Nancy was now sure that Miss Swang was none other than Allison herself. She is the one who poisoned me. Time froze as Nancy looked up slowly into Allison's eyes again. They held a sudden, terrified awareness. She knows that I know, Nancy thought, and the words came out before Nancy knew what she was saying. Allison, it's you, she gasped. You're the poisoner. With a strangled cry, Allison spun around and crashed her way through the crowd. Nancy struggled to sit up, but she was too weak. Someone stop her, she cried. She is a murderer. Ned finally broke through the circle of people and reached down to pull Nancy to her feet. Are you all right? He asked. Don't think about me, Nancy said frantically. You have to catch Allison. As she turned in the direction Allison had run, Nancy saw Paul was already chasing her with Bess a few steps behind him. And from their separate tables across the room, Kim and Lena rose to their feet and followed too. Ned grabbed Nancy's hand and pulled her through the restaurant so fast her feet barely touched the ground. They're going into the grand ballroom, Nancy panted. Hurry! They burst through the door and stopped short. Someone had turned on all the spotlights in the room. They beamed an intense, merciless light onto the model's runway. In a few days, some of the world's hottest models would be sweeping down that runway, but now there was only one person on it now. Allison. She was cringing like a trapped animal under the blinding lights in the middle of the runway, her hands held out in front of her as if to ward off an attack. And Kim, Paul, Bess, and Lena were slowly, menacingly advancing toward her. So you're the one who tried to kill me, you little worm, hissed Kim. You're not going to get out of this one. They're going to put you away forever. She's crazy, Allison said tremulously. Help me, Paul. Help you? Paul repeated incredulously. Why would you do that? You tried to kill the woman I love. Allison burst into tears. It's not true, she sobbed. Tell me it's not true. You don't love her. She turned away and buried her face in her hands. You're acting like some sort of lynching party, she cried. It's better than you deserve, Kim snapped. Stop, everyone, called Nancy. Stay where you are. It's okay. She's not going anywhere. She walked haltingly toward the runway, trying to conceal how weak her legs were. Her eyes were fixed on Allison. No one's gonna hurt you, she said, but it's all over, Allison. I don't know why you did it, and I don't care. All I want is— Well, I care, Kim interrupted savagely. Please, Nancy said. I need some information from this girl right away. Spots were starting to dance in front of her eyes again. You need information? I'll give you information, said Lena. She tried to blame this all on me. She gets no sympathy from me, I'll tell you that much. Or from me, Bess chimed in. Nancy, she tried to kill you. Nancy lurched as a shudder racked her body. Stop, everyone, she said, and they fell silent. Nancy looked straight into Allison's eyes. I have got your poison in me, she said, and if you do not tell me the name of it, I will be dead before lunch. Carefully, she climbed the stairs to the runway and put a hand on Allison's shoulders. No one is going to hurt you, she said again. We just want the truth. A shudder wrenched from Allison's entire frame, and she pulled away from Nancy's touch. Her fists were clenched, her face beaded with sweat, but suddenly she relaxed. And when she began to talk, the light in her eyes looked almost angelic. I always loved Paul, she said. When he was working with Kim and I was just starting out with Lena, I saw him everywhere. Mostly people ignored me, but Paul was always so nice to me. He always asked me how I was doing. He always said hi when he saw me. Sure he did, said Kim. He felt sorry for the ugly duckling. Allison stared into Paul's face and smiled beautifully. I know that's not true, Paul, she said. I know you really cared about me. You were the only person who asked me how I was doing. You took a real interest in me, and that's why I love you. Kim snorted incredulously, and Nancy gestured fiercely that she should be quiet, but Allison didn't seem to have noticed, except that now she turned her gaze on Kim. I hate you, Kim, she said in the softest of voices. You were using Paul, using his infatuation with you to get every drop of blood out of him. He thought you loved him, but I knew better. You're the kind of woman who's only in love with her career. So I decided I should get you out of the way, she continued simply. This world doesn't need more people like you, and that way I'd have a better chance with Paul. Nancy glanced over at Ned. He looked as horrified as she felt. I guess you know what happened next, Allison said to Nancy. In a funny way, it was all Morgan's idea. She once told me how careless Kim was with the jewelry she designed and how Morgan was always having to retrieve it from places like the pressers. So I got that part-time job at Mr. Orsini's and waited. I knew I'd get the chance to use that poison sometime. I wasn't sure how, but everything comes if you wait long enough, doesn't it? And my chance came when Morgan brought in the new outfit Kim had designed and forgot to take the brooch off. Perfect! Allison chuckled. I realized right away that Lena had copied the brooch. I'd seen the drawing in her office, and that meant that Lena had been alone with the brooch at some point. So I figured Lena'd get the blame if anyone did. And if somehow no one thought of Lena, there was always Morgan. Nancy cleared her throat. She was having more and more trouble speaking. Each word took a huge effort. But I got in your way when I tried on the dress unexpectedly, didn't I? She asked. You sure did, Allison said. At first I felt terrible when Paul mentioned that you'd worn it. But when you tried to kill Paul, she stared accusingly at Ned, I decided not to help you anymore. She shook her head. I still hadn't had any luck with Kim, so I put the poison in her sugar when room service left a food cart outside her door, and then she still didn't get any. Kim gasped, but Nancy's warning look stopped her before she said anything. Where's the pin now? She asked. Oh, I sneaked in and threw it out once I realized what had happened, Allison said airily. So you sent me that second letter? Nancy prompted. She could hardly see now. The pain in her head was so bad. Ned glanced at her anxiously, but she didn't notice. And you've mentioned those threats Kim had been receiving. That's where I started to get confused, Allison. You said you'd do all the horrible things to me that Kim had read about in those anonymous letters, but she'd been getting telephone threats, not letters. Allison sighed. I guess I blew it there. When I read about the threats in Bronwyn Weiss's column, I just assumed they were coming in letters. Then she brightened. Well, so I made one mistake. It doesn't add up to much when you think about how many mistakes I didn't make. Until this morning, Nancy said quietly, when you wore the same shoes you'd worn at Mr. Orsini's. Right. Until this morning, that was really... Allison broke off and shook her head. Well, it's all over now, Nancy said, and now you won't be charged with murder. You can give me the name of the poison, and I'll go right to the hospital. If I get there in time, she said to herself, if I can just hold on a little longer. But she didn't think she'd be able to hold on. So this is what it feels like when your life ebbs away, she thought. Allison just stood there. There was a smile on her face as if she hadn't quite understood what Nancy was saying. Tell her what the poison is, Bess cried. Allison didn't seem to hear Bess. She was still smiling at Nancy. You're right, she said. It is over. She pulled a white handkerchief out of her pocket and pressed it against her lips. For a second she stayed upright, and then her eyes rolled back into her head. She coughed a little, stumbled backward, and fell into the floor. Shock galvanized Nancy into action. In an instant she was beside Allison, tearing away the handkerchief from the girl's mouth. There on Allison's lips was a yellowish substance, some kind of powder. Nancy bent to look at it more closely, then horrified she reeled back. It's the poison, Nancy cried. She poisoned herself. She grabbed Allison's shoulders and shook her. Tell me the name of the poison, she pleaded. I have to know. There was no answer. Allison was only half conscious. Her head lolled sickeningly to one side, and she sagged like a limp rag doll in Nancy's arms. The only person who could save Nancy's life was now dying. Chapter 15. This is getting dark, yo. Okay, my shirt decided to start disappearing into the abyss. There we go. Ned grabbed Nancy's hand, and then he threw her across the room at Allison. Hashtag canceled. Hi, Auburn Dusk. How are you doing? Whoa, Kim is a vampire. Let's wrap this up. Dying here. Exactly. Nancy. She can just second chance it. I know. So much death. So much drama. Thank you for the claps and for the claps. I really appreciate it. We have one more chapter left. Okay. One more chapter. Let's see how this gets wrapped up. Is this the last Nancy book? Does she die forever? Okay. Only one Sag. I know. Big Sag. Okay. Chapter 16. Frantically, Nancy turned to Paul. "She loves you," she cried. "You've got to help me save her. It's my only chance." Without a word, Paul scrambled up to the runway and knelt at Allison's side. He took a deep breath and picked her up in his arms. "Allison, it's me, Paul," he said hoarsely. "Don't die. I do care about you." He shook her gently, then more vigorously. "Someone get some ice water," Nancy gasped over her shoulder, "and call an ambulance." Immediately, Bess dashed out of the room. Paul took Allison's chin in his hand. "I don't want you to die," he said frantically. "Everything's gonna be all right. Allison? Allison, Kim is still alive. Nancy's still alive. Tell me the name of the poison. You don't want to be responsible for the death of an innocent person, do you? Please, Allison. Save your own life. You have too much to live for." Bess came running back in with a pitcher in her hand. "Here's the ice water," she panted. "Ned's calling an ambulance." Paul grabbed the pitcher and splashed a little of the water on Allison's face. And now at last she began to stir. She moaned, and a little garbled stream of words came out of her mouth. The little circle of people watching her pressed closer. "Allison, talk to me," Paul begged. "Nothing to live for," Allison sighed. "I want to die." "No," said Paul. He shook her again. "I don't want you to die. Hey, come on, who will I take to breakfast if you're not here? Who will I complain to? Come on, Allison, I care about you." His voice broke. "I really do," he added, almost to himself. Outside, Nancy could hear the wail of an ambulance. The siren cut off abruptly, and then there was the sound of feet thudding toward the grand ballroom. "They're here," she said to Paul. Allison gave the ghost of a smile and murmured something no one could hear. "What was that?" Paul asked, bending down toward her. Allison smiled again, a peaceful smile, as if she'd somehow finished struggling. She whispered something into Paul's ear. "Thank you," Paul said fervently. "We got it, Nancy," he shouted. "She told me the name of the poison." The ambulance attendants were rushing into the room. Nancy held her hands beseechingly up to Ned. "Help me," she said. He scooped her up in his arms. "It's okay," he whispered into her hair. "You're going to be all right now, and you solved the case. I love you, Nancy." But Nancy was too weak to answer. So dramatic. Dr. Liston was waiting for them all at the hospital's emergency entrance. A flurry of hospital attendants descended on Nancy and Allison and rushed them into the building. "Get them up to pathology right away," ordered Dr. Liston. "I only hope we're not too late," she added, looking anxiously down at Nancy's face. Nancy hardly heard her. She was barely aware of being rushed through the corridors as doctors and nurses raced beside her gurney. "I think we're losing her," Dr. Liston said quietly to a nurse. "If that antidote's not ready within an hour, it's all over." Nancy woke up and stretched luxuriously. Only a day had passed since she'd been brought here, but she felt like an entirely new person. The white sheets around her felt wonderfully crisp, and the huge bouquet of flowers in the vase next to her bed gave a sweet scent to the whole room. Even the drab green walls looked beautiful this morning. In fact, Nancy thought with a grin, I love everything about being here. Green walls, ivy drip in my arm, ugly hospital gown, everything. I'm alive. "Knock, knock," said a warm voice at her door, and a beaming Dr. Liston walked in. "Looking good, I see," she said approvingly. "You are a great patient, Nancy. We'll be able to discharge you very soon. I'd like to keep you under observation for a few more days, but I'm sure there will be no problems." "Gorgeous flowers," she added. "Who sent them?" "I think Ned did," Nancy said, "the minute you told him I was going to be okay." She could hardly remember anything of what had happened the day before, but she did remember Ned's jubilant face when he and Bess had finally been allowed to see her at the end of the day. "He was awfully happy," Dr. Liston smiled at the memory. "You know, we had a rocky couple of hours when it looked as though there wasn't going to be time. When I finally went into the waiting room and told your friends we'd finished and that it was working, I thought they'd yell the place down." "How is Allison doing?" Nancy asked. A shadow crossed the doctor's face. "As well as can be expected. She took a lot of poison, much more than you got, and swallowing it made it work much faster than your dose did. We almost lost her, and she's still very weak. But she'll live to stand trial. What ends up happening to her is all a question of whether or not she understands what she did. Now you're meeting with everyone who was involved in the case this morning, right?" the doctor added. "Right," Nancy said. "Bess arranged it. I just wanted to fill them all in, and I think I hear them coming now." "Nancy?" Bess peeked into the room. Behind her were Ned, Paul, and Kim. "Come on in," said Dr. Liston. "I was just leaving. Have a nice visit, but don't stay too long. We don't want the patient getting tired out." She winked at Nancy and walked out the door. "I'm sorry there aren't more chairs," said Nancy as her 4 visitors filed in. "That's okay," Kim said brusquely. "I'm not staying long." She walked up to Nancy's bed and stared down at her expressionless. "I just want to say one thing," she blurted out. "I know about Lena stealing my designs. Morgan told me she'd let her into my office, and she kind of blew up on me. She really let me have it. I guess I'd never realized how much she hated the way I treated her. Kim looked down and began fidgeting with her hands. It was strangely unsettling to see her so ill at ease, like looking at a completely different person. While Morgan was talking, I suddenly realized how important she is to me, Kim continued. It's not only the business part of it, although I see now I couldn't possibly manage that side of things without her, but it's more, well, even when I've been horrible to her, she's always been loyal to me. Letting Lena into my office was the only time she ever went behind my back, and I have to admit I can't blame her for having done it. She glared down at Nancy. So I gave her a raise and promised I'd make it up to her, and now I'll say what I really came here to say. I hate apologizing, but I apologize to her, and I'm apologizing to you too. You saved my life, and I'm gonna try to live it like a better person from now on. Thank you. Kim turned and marched out the door. Wow, Bess said after a second. She didn't even mention the fashion show once. She must have decided to change her life. The show's still on, though, put in Paul. Kim should sail through it, especially now that Lena won't be taking part. She won't? Nancy raised herself up on one elbow to stare at him. What happened? She confessed, said Paul. Confessed to stealing the designs and making all those threatening phone calls and planting a bomb in Kim's office. It's an incredible story, he went on. Once she'd mentioned the designs she saw in Kim's office, she hired a secret partner in New York and sent him drawings she'd made up from memory. He took the designs to a sweatshop and had some samples run overnight and then sent the samples back to Lena. She sweet-talked the owner of Miss Dare into selling them later. Apparently he didn't question her too closely about where they'd be coming from. I gather he owed her some kind of favor. Lena swears it was the first time she tried something like this. She was hoping she'd be able to make a little money on the side and steal Kim's thunder at the same time. What about the bomb in the paperweight? How she managed to get that in with the hotel security so tight? Nancy asked. The U.S. mail, Paul answered. One of those gag item catalogs. The bomb was originally part of an exploding cake, if you can believe that. Something you'd order as a party trick. Lena had noticed Kim's paperweight once, and she bought a duplicate. There was a little hollow in the bottom of the paperweight, and she just stuck the bomb in there. She guessed Kim would never notice it with her desk always in such a mess, and if she had noticed, what was there to connect the bomb with Lena? Lena certainly knew how to plan ahead, Nancy said dryly. She sure did, Paul said. Knowing her, I'm sure she'll hire some hotshot lawyer and there'll be a long trial, but no matter what sentence she gets, Lena is ruined in this town. Unless she changes the name of her company to Hot Properties. Just then, Dr. Liston poked her head into the room. So much for the late-breaking news, she said. Everyone clear out now. This girl needs her rest. Just one thing, said Bess. Nan, your dad called last night. He'd made a call home to Hannah. I guess he was having such bad luck catching fish out in the middle of nowhere he moved to a lodge closer to town, and she told him she thought there was something the matter with you. I filled him in on everything, and he's calling me back today. He wants to know whether you want him to come home. Beaming, Nancy shook her head. Tell him to keep fishing, she said. I'm just fine, and tell him it's mostly because of you. If you hadn't been around to help me... Oh, stop, said Bess, blushing. All I did was nag you once in a while. I'm serious, Bess, said Nancy quietly. You were the best friend I could have had. You really came through for me when I needed you the most. I'll never forget it. Bess leaned forward and gave Nancy a big hug. I'm just glad you're okay now, she said. Now, Mr. Nickerson, she added sternly, I will wait for you down in the lobby. You have 5 minutes. Don't tire the patient out. As she and Paul walked out, she closed the door gently behind her. Ned took Nancy's hand and held it tightly. It was a long time before he spoke. I'm glad you're alive, he said at last. Then he put his arms around her and gave her a bone-crushing hug. Easy, easy, Nancy said with a laugh. I'm a sick woman. Then she drew his head down for a kiss. But I'm getting better all the time, she whispered. So stick around, because we have lots more cases to solve. Ned collapsed on the edge of the bed, his face filled with mock anguish. More cases! When does it end? Nancy fluffed up the pillows and settled back in bed. It doesn't, she answered with a smile. End of chapter 16 and end of book. We did it. Nancy dies. Series over. Nancy dying. What is this? The 90th anniversary. Oof. It's okay. The Hardy Boys will figure things out. Nancy almost dies while I play unfitting music. I'm sorry. I just have a playlist going. I didn't know what was going to be happening. Frank, we determined Nancy died from natural causes. Dang, I thought it was poison. She's alive. Unhappy endings. As well as can be expected, that is to say she's very dead. Weird that this didn't end with Nancy blocking attacks. Yeah, right? Ha! Ha ha ha! Hassa! Ned took Nancy's hand and said, I think we should see other people. I'm a sick woman. Yay, thank you for the claps, claps, and claps. It doesn't end, at least not till her tries to make mid. Are they still making books? Like Nancy Drew books? I don't even know, man. I don't even know. Cool. Well, I know that this was only an hour and 5-minute stream, but I'm done with the book. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm gonna try to stream on Thursday morning. Maybe? That's up in the air. My to-do list is large. But I may try to stream Thursday morning. I'm not sure. If not, I'll see you when I see you, I guess. I'm glad that you could catch some too, Coley. It was great to see you. It was great to see all of you today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great rest of the day. I'll see you soon. Please take care of yourselves and don't be a stranger. Much love from me to you, and I'll see you guys later on. Bye-bye!